Welcome everyone to the Brass Summer 2023 Online Symposium. I'm Angel Truesdale, the chair of the Business Reference and Academics Libraries Committee for Brass, and also the chair of the Symposia Subcommittee. I want to thank Christy Cunningham, Brian Garrison, and Christine Pollock. All sessions will be recorded and sent out to those who have registered. Please mute your audio and video as we get started. Thank you for spending time with us today and our presenters. Now to turn it over to my colleague, Christine, to get us started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the last session today. I will just start us off running by just introducing Morgan Ritchie-Baum and Summer Krstevska from Wake Forest University to give us their presentation called "The Devil is in the Details, Letting Go of Control in the Business Information Classroom." Take it away, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Christine. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And let me get myself organized. Okay.
All right.
Does that look like what it should look like, Summer?
Yes. Thanks for sharing the screen, Morgan.
You're welcome.
All right. Hey, everyone. So as Christine so nicely said, this is our presentation, The Devil is in the Details, Letting Go of Control in the Business Information Classroom. Thank you so much for being here at least 3 p.m. Eastern time for many of us, end of the day. Hopefully you enjoy. As Christine said, I'm Summer Krstevska. I'm here with my partner in crime, Morgan Ritchie-Baum. We make up the Wake Forest University Business Librarian team.
Yep. And so I have been a business librarian at Wake Forest now for 3 years. I'm starting my 3rd year, and I was a public business librarian before. So very excited to be here with you all today.
All right. So our presentation today was really inspired by a problem we found ourselves facing. And this was the problem of our students telling us what they wanted to hear, what they thought we wanted to hear, sorry, not what they wanted to learn.
So as part of that, our presentation today is really going to focus on things that we tried to do in our own instruction to create more agency and independence within our students. So we're hoping that you will come away from this session recognizing both opportunities to provide your student more agency in their learning, as well as doable ideas for creating those opportunities. There are 2 of us, so we will endeavor to do our best to respond to any kinds of questions or things like that that come up in the chat. But do feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions. We'll try and catch you or respond to things as they come up in the chat. And I know our moderators will help us out with that. But to get us started, you now know kind of what we are hoping you take away from this presentation, but we really want you to have an opportunity to consider what you are hoping to learn in this presentation and why. What sparked an interest in this topic? What are some of the connections you have with this topic that you are looking to grow? And to provide you that opportunity, we actually want to give you 2 dedicated minutes to think about those questions. And then we will give you the opportunity on the next slide to share. So to help with that thinking process, we have some nice, calming, relaxing music, a little not as exciting as the music Brass provides you, but hopefully calming all the same, and some nice fish. So we're going to take 2 minutes here and let you think, and then we'll be back. All right, we made it 2 minutes. Good job, everyone. So the activity we kind of just completed together is one example of how we view letting go of control and kind of getting comfortable with that super awkward period of silence in the classroom. So with all of that being said, I want to invite you to participate in this poll everywhere. Hopefully you see those instructions on the screen for participating. You can just go to polleverywhere.com/MRB WFU, or you can join by text message. And we'll just take a few minutes here to let you tell us, what are you hoping to learn at the end of this conversation? Sorry, that was my fault. Awesome. 14 sections. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm so happy there's a summer breath, because this is such a great opportunity to get inspiration. Yeah, Gen Z, I have seen so many interesting conversations coming up about how we teach Gen Z. And it sounds to me from a few of the presentations I've seen, there is actually quite a lot for us to learn. So absolutely. We'll give it just another minute here, and then we'll move on. So while these last few thoughts come through, just to kind of give you some more context around how we view letting go of control before we jump into a more formal bit of our presentation. I think the periods of intentional silence, actually giving our students time to think, can be super important. So these kind of intentional periods of silence are definitely a powerful tool for creating a more inclusive classroom. You are giving your students more time to organize their thoughts, the opportunity to do so. 2 minutes feels like forever. For us, it can, of course, be a little bit awkward, but giving our students time to collect their thoughts, of course, is so important. And that's where we think thinking music, like we played, can come in really handy. Plus, if you use slides, if you embed YouTube videos into your slides, you don't get those annoying ads, which can cause a whole other level of awkwardness, depending on the ads that sometimes come up on YouTube videos. So yeah, this exercise is definitely very much in line with one of the many ways we explored giving students greater autonomy in our instructions. There'll be links to this, so I'll try and save some of these because I think there's some great learning outcomes here. All right, let me get my screen rearranged here and see if I can go to the next slide.
All right, thanks, Morgan. So in our attempt to solve our problem that I mentioned earlier, we found ourselves learning about and experimenting with student-driven learning strategies that ultimately work to encourage student motivation by granting them more autonomy in the classroom. One of these strategies is a grading methodology that we implemented called ungrading. And as the name applies, ungrading allowed us to take the focus off of the grades and put the focus on the students to what and how they are learning. And this led us to have the students develop their own personal learning outcomes or goals, asking what they wanted to learn as relevant to our class and why. I do just want to reiterate, I know many of you probably don't teach for credit like Morgan and I do, are privileged to get to do, but the strategies that are used within ungrading, I think, can be implemented in a one-shot situation, which we'll talk about as we keep going. We also implemented as much active learning by doing, as we frequently call it, activities into our lesson plans. And ultimately, I just want to put a caveat that at the heart of all of these strategies is reflection. And we made sure to provide opportunities within each for the students to have a chance to really utilize metacognition and think about how they're thinking and how they're learning. Morgan and I will talk in detail about each of these strategies in the following slides, but one other thing to keep in mind with ungrading and student-driven learning is that it doesn't mean our instruction has no structure. It probably has more structure than ever before. I know I read that comment about being less of a perfectionist with lesson planning. The ironic aspect of all of these solutions is that they actually require a lot of planning and structure in order to be effective. The actual like letting go that we're talking about happens in the doing phase. So keep that in mind. We're hoping, we hope when we use these strategies that they've provided enough structure for the students to feel like they can take risks, be vulnerable, and contribute to the class community in their own learning. And we'll touch on all of this more.
All right, we wanted to give you kind of a visualization, a roadmap of how this sort of all unfolded for us. So really everything kicked off with a book club that our Center for Teaching here at Wake Forest was offering. The book Focus was Susan Bloom's great text, Ungrading. If you're interested in ungrading, this is a great introductory text with lots of examples from a lot of different disciplines, so I'd highly recommend. Summer and I both attended this, and we immediately sought opportunities to incorporate some of the ideas and concepts of the text. It's very inspirational and it makes it seem very doable. So from there, we've kind of explored and have continually refined our understanding not only of ungrading, but also creating opportunities for greater student autonomy and resilience in our classroom. So for anyone who might be familiar with the Lean Startup method, thanks in part to our half semester courses, that's all, we only get 7 weeks to teach for credit here at Wake Forest. We really viewed these classes kind of as our minimum viable product, if you will. And we worked with students to understand what is and isn't working in the classroom before we sort of pivoted, as you can see on the screen, to sort of the next iteration. So we really view going into each class trying to accept, it's not always easy to accept, but we always endeavor to accept that things will not be perfect, but that we are going to iterate over time. We go in knowing this is a lesson we're going to be learning, and we're going to learn that lesson and apply it the next time we try that class. So intentionally, we try and build student autonomy in our courses by involving students as much as we possibly can in the design process. So we are actually flexible to a point with something like the syllabus. And we always try to find one way students' voices can be involved in the creation of the class and immediately implement that. There might be multiple ways, but we always try and find at least one way, hopefully creating that kind of greater buy-in in a shorter period of time. Because again, we usually only have 7.5 weeks, or you may only have 5 minutes, depending on if you're doing a one-shot instruction. So what's even better though about this whole process is that we've kind of intrigued enough students in our process of teaching that we've had a number of repeat students who we really think about deserve credit as co-designer of our courses.
So as Morgan mentioned, we were in this book club discussing the Ungrading book by Susan Bloom. This was our ultimate inspiration, and the book mentions, you know, there are many reasons why you would consider doing ungrading, and there's many ways of doing it also, but the end destination is generally the same. So if you don't, you know, find anything to align with what me and Morgan are talking about, but you're interested in the concept, there's so many other reasons to do ungrading. So check out the book. So some of the main reasons that stood out to Morgan and I that made it seem like ungrading would contribute to improvement to our problem was that many believe that ungrading encourages student agency, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Also, we ultimately wanted to create a classroom atmosphere devoid of fear and threat related to getting a bad grade. Wake Forest students are super motivated just to get an A, and they're very scared to do things like the wrong way, which, you know, is the opposite of the research process, right? You want to have experimentation. So instead, we really wanted our classroom environment to be focused on learning. And what we mean by that is like creating this safe space for experimentation, risk-taking, creativity, like making sure they feel safe to maybe get things wrong, to try again. So to help students feel comfortable with experimenting and navigating the ambiguity related to research. We implemented ungrading using a variety of strategies, all of which provide frequent opportunities for students to reflect. And as I mentioned earlier, reflection really is the core of ungrading. It encourages that metacognition that I mentioned, and it solidifies connections about what the students are learning and the process that they're making, the progress that they're making. The students did have they had to complete a final self-assessment at the end of each semester to reflect on what they've done and learned as what grade they believe they earned and why. These strategies included having the students develop personal learning goals, having students submit weekly reflection journals, providing consistent feedback, and checking in with the students, both individually and within their project groups. As Morgan said, we've iterated our ungrading processes quite a few times now, and we wanted to just share some of the feedback. There's a lot of feedback, but this student, I love this one. The grade structure of this class allowed for it to be much more enjoyable and put learning at the forefront. It is for this reason that I think I'll remember almost everything for this class in 5 years. This felt really good to read. And this one also, it was incredible. It allowed me to enjoy this class so much more and learn so much more. First of all, it allowed me to treat you like a friend. Let's be real, if I had to suck up to you the entire class in an effort to get a good grade, that would have been miserable and unnatural. Instead, I was able to treat you like a person, mess with you a little bit, hang out, and more importantly, be myself around you. It was so much more enjoyable. Additionally, I think I was able to learn more because of it. I think this really highlights one thing that ungrading talks about, and that's like the power dynamic between the faculty member or, the instructor and the student, and how you're trying to kind of make an equal balance there.
Right. So as Summer mentioned, the early development of and continual reflection on students' personal learning goals were really an essential element of our students' experience around ungrading in our classroom, as well as one strategy we've explored for providing them greater agency and control over their learning. We obviously did this in a 4-credit class, but this is also something you can consider. It's again, another very simple thing you can even consider doing in a one-shot. You are there, you're in the room, you've been invited there for a purpose, but what are students hoping to get out of you being there? Do they even have any sort of, do they have any sort of experience to tie why you're even there? Give them a chance to make those connections and think about what they're hoping to learn from you. But I will say, having students develop their own learning goals is easily one of the most deceptively hard asks we had of our students, as we really wanted to ensure that students' learning goals were smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. And we really encouraged them to think beyond skills that they wanted to develop in the course, and think about what skills they could think about exploring, developing in the course that would serve them in life, right? So it's not just about learning something for school, but it's about learning something about yourself and your ability to do something that will hopefully serve you in your life. So in action, this process of student developed learning goals was pretty much a constant feedback loop between the students and us, as we asked them to think more critically about the how, the why, the what of their learning goals, as well as how their goals kind of evolved, right, over the course of the 7 weeks, and what that evaluation revealed about themselves and their understanding of the material. Again, in a one-shot, you can also think, this can be done, right? I just actually learned a term today that was like the first day final, right? You walk in your first day, or you walk into that instruction class, and you say, what do you know about X, Y, and Z? What do you hope to learn? And then you do the same thing at the end, right? And it really allows our students a chance to see how much they've grown either over 7 weeks or 50 minutes, whatever the case may be. So from a practical standpoint, Summer and I really had to consider our own learning objectives, of course, and course structure, ensuring that there was enough flexibility in our course and our learning outcomes to accommodate the students' own goals, and make sure that our assessments that encouraged active, consistent participation also allowed room for reflection, right, on those personal learning goals, as well as our own learning objectives and assessments. So it's not like we asked a whole lot of the students. Again, they have a lot of flexibility here, but they're going to be thinking a lot, and we are trying to ensure we're providing the space for them to be doing this critical evaluation. So like everything else, how we presented and practiced student-created learning goals have evolved kind of as we have taught subsequent courses together. But as with a lot of the elements of this course, ironically, what seems to work best in in our experience is to provide the students a lot of structure in the development of individual student learning goals. So for example, introducing the idea of goal creation in the first day of class with like a think, pair, share activity, asking students to share how they understand the concept of business research, how they have practiced and experienced it, and then why did they decide to sign up for this course, right? So not everyone has to share. I really believe in creating lots of different ways of participating, right? Trying to be thinking about all the different ways somebody can participate that doesn't look like speaking up in class, because that's not comfortable for everybody. So we often pair this with a written reflection as well. That's a little bit more personal, that can then be turned into us. And then we take all that and we ask them to really think about how that might look like a goal. So we break that down into a goal together. And we found that that's been really fruitful in terms of motivating students to engage more deeply and personally with the work and the research that they end up undertaking in our course. So finally, focusing on making our instruction as student-driven and as active as possible has been really critical to creating greater agency for our students, both in our 4-credit and our one-shot instruction. So in practice, this sounds like students talking to each other and to the class as a whole, way more than we actually end up talking to them. It's kind of how I always judge my instruction. Did my students talk more than I talked? If they did, then I feel pretty good about how things have turned out for that session. You know, what does this look like? It looks like students teaching other students, creating and sharing their own instructional materials and understandings. It can feel pretty scary and overwhelming at first for us and for the students. You know, we're telling them we know that they have the skills, and if they don't feel like they have the skills, that maybe someone in the class or their group, their working group does. So we also tell them, you know, if you as a group, for example, are struggling and nobody seems to have the answer that you're looking for, let's work it out together, whatever that it may be. So it's very much a collective working environment. So an example of this in a one-shot activity is with an activity we call the database crash test. Nancy, I think Nancy Lovis is on here. She's a really big fan of the database crash test. So this is very similar to database speed dating, if you're maybe familiar with that activity. So we've done this both at a graduate level and in an undergraduate course, and essentially, instead of doing a basic introduction in database demo, we ask students to share their experience using the library. We fill in the gaps that there might be, maybe not a lot of, you know, if it's a first year class, maybe they haven't been to our library. So we ask them, you know, any library, right? What do you do when you go into a library? You know, what is the purpose of a library? And then we ask them to think about their own research habits and experiences. So what we're really trying to do here is let them know that they actually already have a lot of the skills and understanding to successfully navigate so many of these specialized sources that they need to use in the business context, and that we are going to have them prove it to us that they have those skills. So we break them out into groups, we assign them a specific database, and we usually try and at least have 2 groups separately working on the same database. And then we answer the questions you see here in the slides. And then we have them share out at the end. So Summer and I move around group to group, which really allows us and the students to have kind of a more intimate experience of what working with us is actually like. So, you know, if they come to our offices, maybe it won't be so scary, you know, the next time they need to make a research appointment. And then at the end, right, they do all this work, they answer all these questions on a collaborative Google Doc that we then actually put on their research guide. So they have created their own research guide, in essence, providing each other kind of step-by-step instructions for using a lot of these tools. And the best thing is, especially if you can have 2 groups working on the same database, they see there's a lot of different ways to get to the same outcome, right? There's a lot of different types of information on these tools, and here are some different ways we can go about finding that. So ultimately, these classes end up being very loud, a little rambunctious, and a lot of fun, and it's really exciting to see some of the dots connecting and the learning happening too.
I just wanted to say sometimes too, like when we're going around helping the groups, like the professor inevitably hears like some of the questions the students are asking, or the professor gets called over to one of the groups and is asked a research question. And I think it's really good for some faculty members to actually like connect, like, oh, okay, they have questions about research and how to
Yeah.
find this type of information. So that's always helpful.
And Kim, I see your question in the chat. How much time would you allocate for that activity? So we've definitely done it a couple different ways. I think probably the quickest we've ever done this activity was maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Does that feel right, Summer?
Yeah, I mean, you can go in with like minimal introduction if you want and just say, hop on it and we'll come around. Or you could add an intro and a follow-up like presentation by each group at the end or something. But
and it's kind of like what your style is, right? So sometimes just jumping into things will be it's a little jarring for the students, but that's actually not a bad thing, right? Like it kind of wakes them up and be like, oh my God, they're not really giving me a whole lot of details about what I'm supposed to do. I'm just supposed to do this thing. And then we do kind of that more formal introduction group by group. So it's a little bit more personalized.
it's really good for like that 8 a.m. one shot.
Yeah.
Lou Marie asked, do you do a reflection afterwards? So I kind of touched on that a second ago, but we have done it in our own classes, but also in a few of the one shots where we're given a lot of time, like the students in their group go up and show like how they navigated the database. We've done stuff like that before. So you can do different levels of reflection, like just a share out or a whole like kind of review of the resource.
Yeah, and to your follow-up question, 20, yeah, so I think like in a 20 to 30 minute session, we've done, I think we've had like 3 databases we've focused on, 6 groups. So, 2 groups are doing each of the databases. And then if we are really tight on time, we will ask very specific questions. So we find them more specific. So the students kind of go in hunting for something more specific instead of something a little bit more general. And it's like a scavenger hunt. And a lot of times we'll talk about it that way. And that tends to help ramp things up. Have we done this activity online? Somewhere?
I don't know if we've done it online, but I could see it being done in some breakout rooms potentially,
Yeah.
or maybe not even. Like each student could just do a database.
Yeah.
I could see it working. We
And
don't teach online much anymore now. I hate saying like post-COVID, but Wake Forest is very much like back in person.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I mean, open communication, I mean, first and foremost, we kind of let professors know, like, this is what we're gonna, you've invited us into your classroom. This is what we're planning on doing, and laying out how this connects with the assignment. We, of course, accept any sort of feedback, but we found, at least in our experience, professors have been very gracious in allowing us the time and space. And I think they actually, it's funny, in the classes we've done this repeat, they give us more time because they find watching the students work together and develop kinds of the questions or thinking or asking the questions about the research is really illuminating for them as well. And please steal it wholesale. That's super exciting. All right. Should we jump to the activity, Summer?
Sure.
I think I got all the questions.
Yeah, keep the questions coming if you have any. Happy to keep answering in chat, but we wanted to leave some time to do this activity. So we have a Google Doc here with a mock lesson plan that we wrote out. And what we want you to do is just, obviously read through the lesson plan, think about the strategies Morgan and I talked about in this presentation to make instruction more student driven, or if you've implemented or heard of other strategies that we did not mention, feel free to consider those as well. And what we want you to do is make comments on the lesson plan about like how you would make it more student driven. And then we'll have, question, like a QA and discussion at the end. And I will put the link. Oh, Morgan put the link in the chat.
Yep.
Actually.
So I've got the link in the chat, and then just as an example, you can see where I've given you a sample, right? So on step number 2, explanation of a literature review and keyword usage. I've tried to make this a little bit more active by utilizing some polling in word cloud and then some class discussion. And then John, Are you referring to the lesson plan for the database crash test? Yeah, so I know I've already emailed Angel our activity, or excuse me, our slides, but Angel, I'll send you another link here in a little bit that also includes an outline of that activity. And I want to say, did Biz Liberatory do a blog post on the database?
I think
Crash
Nancy might have wrote something up about the database crash test. I'm not sure if we do it the same exact way. But
Right. Yeah, that's where we got our inspiration from. So, but yes, we'll send that out. Oh, that's a really interesting question, Kimberly. So kind of refocusing them between steps. So we really try and invite them. How do I want to phrase this? Like we really try and invite them to kind of respond to one another. And we emphasize that like up front. So I don't know about students at your university. I'm sure it's pretty much universal. Like they want to please a lot of times. So they're usually like paying attention for something that they can comment on. I don't know about a visual. I don't know. What would you say, Summer?
I think usually we're not doing it in like formal steps. Like we're not walking through the activity with them. We're like, okay, you have, 25 minutes to answer these questions. And then we kind of go around to the groups. And then from there, they share out. Usually we'll pick like one part of that database crash test to share out like, oh, what kind of information was in this database? Or was it hard? Like what was challenging about using that database? Why would you recommend this database for your project? Because we try obviously to tie it to their project.
Yeah, and Heather, I would, to your question, a lot of times they do get the same questions, especially if one of the goals, like one of the learning outcomes Summer and I have, is that we want the students to see that there are many ways to the same answer, or how, depending on the information you look at, that might affect your answer, but you could also certainly give them other questions. It sort of depends on what your learning outcomes are for that particular session, and or what the professor, if you're doing it like in a one shot, what they're hoping to get out of it.
On the note of being more project focused or assignment focused, we have a similar activity. I don't think we really have a name for it. It's not a crash test, where like they're really focusing on some specific piece of information that they still need to find for their project. And then like we show them a LibGuide for the class and like, okay, these are industry-based databases. So if your question is industry-based, try one of these, like basically do a crash test on it. So if you're looking for like a more project-based way of going about this, that could be one way to think about it, right? Get them thinking about the project first and what information they need still or haven't found yet.
Oh, I really love Rashida's comment here. I think modeling is so important, like what Rashida has pointed out here. I think there's, anything we can do, there's an inherent like power dynamic right in the classroom. You as an instructor, whether it's in the one shot or the 4-credit classroom. And I think anything we can do to break down some of those power structures is a good thing. And I think modeling is one way to do that. At least that's how I kind of view it in my mind. But it just shows students like we're just like them, and that but it also reminds us that it's taken us a while to get where we are, right? We have a lot of kind of specialized knowledge that's taken time to attain that, and just thinking about how showing students, that they, depending on what their course in life is, they can get there too. And I think a lot of that starts with modeling. And I also just think this is a fun way to do introductions, because those can be so boring as well.
So many interesting activity suggestions that like, I think I know what they mean, but I want to know more.
Yes. I mean, there's so many good ideas here. Yes, in fact, Anonymous, feel free not to respond to this, but Summer and I are always looking for ways to gamify things.
Yes.
And tournament of abstracts just sounds like something I want to play right now.
Flipped classroom. Yeah, you could have the students even create like a quick tutorial or something, but that takes a lot of technological skill depending on your students. Or they could do a live tutorial instead of creating like a video.
Eric, we've done this exploring synonyms. We've done this in some of our kind of collaborative active exercises that we've done similar to this, that we do synonyms, and that is so helpful, because I think the hardest part for a lot of students when it comes to some of our more specialized tools that they're trying to learn is understanding that databases have a specific language, and it may not be the language you use or the verbiage you use. So having them all of a sudden realize, oh, there is actually more than one word for hot sauce, right? That can be really helpful.
I like the information timeline. I also have never seen that before, but I think on that note, having students create like some sort of visual or their own timeline, right? To show that they understand the information, if that's like one of your core, learning outcomes.
And there's a lot
this is a mock lesson plan, so it's not perfect.
And there's a lot of tools you can use, and they don't always have to be technical, right? So there, of course, we're for right now using Google Docs, for example, so you can do collaborative. There's things like Google Jamboards, but also just using whiteboards, sticky notes. I think anytime you can kind of get students up and active as you're able is also just a really great way to get them physically involved with the research process.
There's a suggestion here from, is this from Alan? Yeah, he said, looking at outcome 1, create a framework for students of being workers in business intelligence unit. I think I'm sure a lot of you have realized this, like making research relevant to like maybe what the students want to do, or usually we're working with a lot of graduate students who are consulting, right? So you can really be like, okay, imagine you're a consultant or whatnot. I think that gives them really good context as to why this is important. And then we have a few things here about creating joint outcomes. I think that's a great way to give the students some agency.
For sure.
Make them think about what they're interested in and why. Oh,
and just Summer, Lou Marie claimed the gamified. Oh. It's really interesting. I've done a few things with abstracts, and students were oddly really into it. So, I'm really interested in this.
Just jumping in for your 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got 5 minutes left. Any other sort of just either general questions anyone has, comments?
Or ideas.
Ideas, yes.
Ideas. Happy to hear those.
Get ready for your fall onslaught.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a link to this in the information that we send out. So these awesome ideas will not be going away. So you'll be able to see these once again. I am going to go back just so you have our email addresses. So Summers is on the top, or excuse me, Summers is on the bottom, mine is on the top. Yeah, just feel free if you think of a question later or you have a thought later, we're always happy to continue this conversation offline.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening.